the fog rolls in before sunrise. It always does. It comes off the Pacific in slow, heavy curtains, swallowing the hills, the water, the handful of wooden structures that pass for a town. By the time the first light touches the bay, most of San Francisco doesn't exist yet. Not really. Not in any way the world would recognize. It is 1845. The place is called Yerba Buena, good herb, named for the wild mint that grows along the dunes. Population, maybe 200 souls, depending on the season, depending on who's counting, depending on whether you count the Ohlone people who have lived in this valley for 4,000 years and are no longer being counted by anyone. 200 people, one dusty plaza, a crumbling Spanish mission that has seen better centuries, a handful of adobe homes, a few trading posts stacked with dried hides and tallow, the currency of this forgotten edge of the world, and a bay so breathtakingly, impossibly beautiful that sailors who first sailed through the Golden Gate sometimes stopped working just to stare. This is the story of that place, that world, that life, quiet, imperfect, real, that was about to be erased so completely that most people today don't even know it existed. Because before the gold, there was something else entirely. Imagine standing on the shore of San Francisco Bay in the spring of 1845 and trying to explain what you see to someone from the future. You would tell them, no cable cars, no Chinatown, no skyline, no bridges, no noise beyond the cry of gulls and the occasional creak of a trading vessel navigating the shallows. The hills are bare. The sand dunes stretch for miles, interrupted only by scrub oak and the wild mint that gives the settlement its name. And the people are not who you'd expect. The Ohlone had been here since before memory. They built their villages along the bay's edge, harvested its shellfish, navigated its waters in reed boats that moved like whispers across the surface. They had complex language families, ceremonial traditions, a relationship with this land so long and so deep that the land itself carried their names. Names that would later be overwritten, erased, replaced with the names of saints and gold miners and railroad barons. By 1845, the Ohlone had already survived the Spanish missions. Barely. The mission system had pulled thousands of them from their villages, baptized them, worked them, and buried them in mass graves. The population that had once numbered in the tens of thousands along the bay had collapsed to a fraction of that. Those who remained lived in the shadows of a colonial system that had no more use for them, now that the missions were secularized and the land was being carved up and handed to Mexican ranching families. They are still here in 1845, but the world is forgetting them in real time. The Californios, the descendants of Spanish and Mexican settlers, are the ones who run things now. They own the ranchos that stretch for miles across the hills. They throw the fiestas that last 3 days. They ride horses the way other people breathe, naturally, effortlessly, as if the animal and the rider were one creature. Their culture is vivid and specific. The women in bright skirts at the baile, the vaqueros working cattle across land that seems to go on forever. The careful hierarchy of a society that knows exactly who it is and exactly where it stands. They are comfortable here at the edge of the Mexican Republic, far from Mexico City, far from Washington, far from anyone who might interfere. That distance, they will soon discover, is not protection. It is simply delay. The United States had been watching California the way a man watches something he intends to take. President James K. Polk wanted the Pacific coast. He wanted the ports. He wanted the land between the Rockies and the sea. And in May of 1846, he got his war, the Mexican-American War, a conflict that would redraw the map of North America and set in motion a chain of events that would detonate 2 years later in a riverbed 150 miles from San Francisco Bay. But in Yerba Buena, in the summer of 1846, the war is mostly a rumor, a distant thunder. What is not distant is the Bear Flag Revolt, a small, scrappy, almost chaotic uprising by American settlers in Northern California who declared, for approximately 3 weeks, an independent California republic. Their flag featured a grizzly bear that looked to most observers more like a pig. Their republic lasted long enough to print the flag, and not much longer. The US Navy arrived, raised the American flag, and that was that. On July 9th, 1846, the American flag goes up over the plaza in Yerba Buena. 70 citizens watch. There is no celebration. There is no resistance. There is mostly a long silence, and then people go back to what they were doing. 6 months later, in January of 1847, the alcalde, the local magistrate, orders the town renamed. Yerba Buena becomes San Francisco. The name change seems small, administrative, bureaucratic. It is not. It is the first act of erasure. The Californios feel it. The Ohlone feel it. Even the handful of American merchants who have lived here long enough to call it home feel it. A subtle shift in the air. A sense that the ground beneath their feet now belongs to a different story. A story being written somewhere else by people who have never seen this bay, never smelled this fog, never watched the pelicans drift low over the water at dusk. San Francisco, 1847. Population growing. Tension growing. A Mormon ship arrived in the summer of 1846, bringing more than 200 settlers from the eastern states. New England sailors jumping ship and deciding to stay. A printing press. A school. The Mormons build, trade, argue, and then, most of them leave when their leader Brigham Young calls them to Utah. They arrive, they change things, they disappear. It is a pattern this city will repeat for decades with everyone who comes. By the end of 1847, San Francisco has perhaps 500 residents. There is a weekly newspaper. There is a hotel of sorts. There is a growing, if fragile, sense that this might become something. Nobody knows what that something is. Nobody has any idea. On the morning of January 24th, 1848, a carpenter named James Marshall is inspecting a mill race, a water channel built to power a sawmill. At a place called Sutter's Mill, in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, 150 miles northeast of San Francisco. The light catches something in the water. He reaches in. He picks it up. He turns it over in his palm. It is heavy in the way that changes a man's breathing, yellow in the way that changes a man's life. Marshall rides to tell his employer, John Sutter. Sutter is not pleased. He has a working ranch, a business, a future that depends on order and quiet. Gold means people. People mean chaos. Sutter swears his workers to secrecy. The secret lasts approximately 2 weeks. By February, whispers are moving through the Sacramento Valley. By March, the whispers have reached San Francisco. But San Francisco isn't listening. Not yet. The rumors sound too large, too good, too insane. The editor of one local newspaper dismisses the reports as fiction, a fantasy. the kind of story desperate men tell themselves. Then, a man named Sam Brannan walks through the streets of San Francisco, holding a bottle of gold dust above his head, shouting words that would echo across the century. Ooga gold, gold, gold from the American River. It is May the 12th, 1848. San Francisco has 9 days left. 9 days of ordinary mornings. 9 days of the baker opening his shop and the fishermen launching their boats and the Californio families riding their horses along the ridge, and the Ohlone men moving quietly through a world that has already taken so much from them and is about to take the rest. 9 days of fog rolling in before sunrise, of the bay reflecting a sky that doesn't know what's coming. 9 days of a city that doesn't yet know it's about to die. They left in a wave, not a metaphor, a literal physical wave. Within days of Sam Brannan's announcement, 3/4 of San Francisco's male population had packed what they could carry and headed for the hills. Shops closed mid-morning, doors left unlocked. A carpenter abandoned a house he was halfway through building, the frame still standing, open to the sky, like a ribcage. A teacher dismissed his class, looked at the empty chairs for a moment, and walked out the door. The newspaper, the one that had called the gold rumors fiction, shut down. Not because the editor changed his mind, because every man who worked there had already left. In 1 week, San Francisco went from a town learning to be a city to a ghost town on the edge of a bay. And then the world arrived. By the end of 1848, news of the gold had reached the eastern United States, then Mexico, then Chile, then Hawaii, then China, then Australia, then Europe. In 1849, the year that would give the gold seekers their name, the 49ers, approximately 90,000 people arrived in California. 90,000 in a single year. Into a territory whose entire non-indigenous population, just 18 months earlier, had been fewer than 15,000. They came by ship around Cape Horn, a journey of 5 to 8 months. They came overland across the plains and the Rockies, burying their dead along the trail. They came from Sonora and Canton and Sydney and Boston, carrying nothing but hope and a willingness to suffer for it. The bay filled with ships. At one point, more than 500 vessels sat anchored in San Francisco Bay, abandoned by crews who had jumped ship to chase gold. The ships were so numerous, so densely packed, that the city eventually built on top of them, filling the shallows with debris, extending the shoreline outward, burying the hulls under what would become city streets. Somewhere beneath the financial district of modern San Francisco, there are still ships, still down there, in the dark, under the concrete, under the weight of everything that came after. The Californio families, the ones who had ridden these hills for generations, who had thrown the 3-day fiestas, who had known every canyon and every creek, found themselves suddenly, violently dispossessed. Their land grants were challenged in American courts. Their cattle were stolen. Their culture was mocked, dismissed, buried under the sheer volume of new arrivals, who had no interest in what had been here before them. Within a decade, most of the great California ranchos were gone. The families scattered, some into poverty, some into obscurity, some into a bitterness so deep it passed down through generations like an inheritance. The Ohlone fared worse. The gold rush brought not just settlers, but violence, systematic, sustained, state-sponsored violence against California's indigenous peoples. What the missions had begun, the 49ers accelerated, By 1870, the indigenous population of California had fallen from perhaps 150,000 at the time of American annexation to fewer than 30,000. The Ohlone of the San Francisco Bay Area were, in the eyes of the official record, gone. They were not gone, but the world had stopped looking. And so we return to the fog. It still comes in before sunrise. It still moves off the Pacific in slow, heavy curtains, swallowing the hills, the water, the city that now sits where the wild mint used to grow. San Francisco today is one of the most famous cities in the world. Tech billionaires and Victorian houses, and the bridge that everyone recognizes and nobody forgets. But underneath all of it, if you know where to look, if you know what questions to ask, you can still find the shape of what was there before. The names the Ohlone gave to the creeks, the routes the Californio Vaqueros rode that became the streets we drive today, the outline of a plaza where, on a quiet July morning in 1846, 70 people watched a flag go up in silence and understood, without anyone saying it, that their world had just ended. History is usually told as a story of arrival, of people coming to a place and building something, of progress moving in one direction, forward, unstoppable, inevitable. But every arrival is also a departure. Every beginning is also an ending. And the city that rose from the gold rush, loud, wealthy, ambitious, extraordinary, rose on top of something quieter, older, and in its own way irreplaceable. The fog doesn't care about any of this. It rolls in anyway. It always does. If this story moved you, if you found yourself thinking about the people who were here before the gold, before the ships, before the noise, leave a comment below. Tell us, what part of this forgotten world surprised you most? Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. History isn't just what happened. It's what we choose to remember.